The Millionaire's twins were blind until the new Maid did something that changed everything. Caleb Morgan had once been a shining name in America's tech industry. At 38, he owned a global corporation and a fortune most people could only dream of. But behind the glitter of shareholder meetings, the glowing headlines, and the grand estate perched on an Oregon hillside, lay a painful truth that no wealth could ever hide. Caleb was a broken man. The day his wife, Amelia, died in childbirth turned what should have been the happiest moment of his life into a nightmare etched into his soul. She left him with twin boys, Theo and Julian. As the nurse placed the infants into his arms, Caleb believed he had at least a reason to keep going. But that fragile hope was crushed when the doctors delivered the verdict. Both boys had been born with total congenital blindness. In that moment, Caleb's world collapsed. From a man brimming with confidence, he became a father drowning in despair. For years, he buried himself in work, partly to escape his grief, partly to chase a miracle for his sons. He spent tens of millions on experimental surgeries in Europe, state-of-the-art clinics in California, and brought leading ophthalmologists to his own mansion. But the answer was always the same: impossible. They will never see the light. 7 years passed, and the Morgan estate became a hollow shell. The walls were lined with safety padding, sharp corners removed, staircases cushioned to protect the boys from falls. Yet in that carefully protected house, what was missing most was laughter. Theo and Julian rarely left their room. Their world was confined to 4 walls and endless darkness. Instead of mischief or curiosity like other children, they sat in silence or cried. Caleb had hired countless nannies and therapists, but none lasted long. Eventually, every one of them surrendered to the quiet suffering of the twins. As for Caleb, he became a ghost within his own home. By day, he immersed himself in boardrooms and business deals. By night, he sat alone at his office window, staring at the glowing garden lights that no longer looked beautiful. To him, all the light in the world meant nothing if his sons could not see it. For 7 long years, the man once celebrated in Silicon Valley clung to a single fragile hope, that a miracle might one day lift Theo and Julian out of the darkness. But no miracle ever came. Then, on a chilly autumn morning, fate arrived in the form of an old bus winding its way up the Oregon hillside. On board sat a young woman clutching a worn handbag to her chest, Lucia Rivera, 28, who had just endured the hardest months of her life. Lucia had once been a passionate preschool teacher at a public school in Portland. She adored children and loved her work, but budget cuts after the pandemic left her unemployed. At the same time, her mother fell seriously ill, requiring daily care and expensive medication. To survive, Lucia took on any job she could find: waiting tables, cleaning houses, even selling trinkets on weekends. Yet, no matter how hard she worked, the income was never enough. When she heard that billionaire Caleb Morgan was hiring household staff, Lucia applied almost out of desperation. She knew the gulf between her humble life and that mansion was enormous. But she needed money, and more than that, she needed stability. Standing before the towering iron gates that morning, Lucia hesitated. The mansion loomed ahead with its white columns, perfectly manicured lawns, and towering glass windows, a world far removed from the rundown streets she had grown up in. Still, she drew in a deep breath and pressed the intercom. The elderly housekeeper welcomed her into the waiting room. As Lucia sat, a sound drifted from upstairs, muffled sobbing. It wasn't the playful whimper of children throwing a tantrum. It was raw, weary crying. Her chest tightened instantly. Having once lost her younger brother, who was blind in a tragic accident, she recognized that kind of pain immediately. When Caleb descended the staircase, she saw a man dressed impeccably but carrying exhaustion in his eyes. He extended his hand politely. "Thank you for coming. I'm Caleb Morgan." Lucia returned the handshake, steadying her nerves. "I'm Lucia Rivera. It's a pleasure to meet you." The interview was brief. Caleb skimmed her modest resume, nothing remarkable beyond experience cleaning for various families. To him, she was just another hire to keep the household in order. But for Lucia, the sound of sobbing upstairs lingered. It awakened something deep within her, a protective instinct urging her to reach out to the children hidden away in sorrow. She had no idea that this very instinct would become the turning point, one that would forever change the fate of the Morgan family, and her own. On her first day at work, Lucia rose before dawn. She dressed in a plain, neat uniform, packing a few familiar cleaning tools into her worn bag. As the bus carried her up the hill toward the imposing Morgan mansion, her heart pounded with both nerves and determination. This was more than a job. It might be her only chance to pull her family out of despair. The housekeeper led Lucia through the wide hallways where sunlight streamed through towering windows, scattering across the marble floors. Yet all that grandeur could not dispel the heavy gloom clinging to the mansion. Even footsteps echoed coldly, as though warmth had long abandoned the place. While cleaning, Lucia heard it again, crying. This time the sound was close. From behind a half-closed door upstairs came the sobs of children. Something compelled her to stop. She peered through the crack. There they were, Theo and Julian, two small boys with identical faces, fragile frames, and vacant eyes fixed on nothing. Nearby, the older nanny reclined, absorbed in her phone, occasionally muttering, "Stop crying. It won't help." Lucia clenched her fists. The sight burned inside her. She wanted to rush in and hold them, but reason reminded her she was only hired to clean. Swallowing the ache in her throat, she walked away. Still, those cloudy eyes haunted her. By midday, Caleb had left for meetings, and the nanny went to the kitchen. Summoning her courage, Lucia picked up a glass-cleaning spray bottle and slipped into the boys' room. Theo and Julian froze, turning their heads toward the unfamiliar sound. Lucia smiled gently. "Hello, little ones. I'm Lucia. I came to make this room shine a bit brighter." Theo tilted his head nervously. "Where's Mrs. Marjorie? She's in the kitchen. It's just us now. Want to help me?" She lifted the spray bottle and pressed the trigger. Psh, psh. The crisp sound echoed in the quiet room. The boys burst into laughter. Julian stretched a hand toward the sound. "What is that? This is my magic wand. It makes windows sparkle. Want to hear it again?" She sprayed in rhythm, turning the noise into a playful beat. The boys giggled, their laughter scattering the heaviness that had long weighed down the room. Then Lucia pulled a small flashlight from her bag, clicking it on and casting a beam onto the wall. She asked softly, "Do you see anything?" Theo instinctively turned his head toward the glow. Julian blinked, tilting his face the same way. Lucia's heart clenched. This was what every doctor had declared impossible. She moved the light left, then right. Their vacant eyes followed, as if drawn to it. Holding back her emotion, she spoke cheerfully. "Well done. Now, let's play Find the Light." For the next 15 minutes, the room transformed into a stage of simple games. The spray bottles hiss, the flashlights glow, the shadows of her hands dancing across the wall. Theo and Julian laughed, chasing the sounds and light, their clumsy steps brimming with joy. When the nanny returned, she froze. The boys who had spent years in silence were now laughing out loud. She stammered, "Whoa, what's happening here?" Theo answered innocently, "We're helping Miss Lucia clean. It's fun." Lucia quickly resumed her chores, but her heart raced. She knew she had just witnessed something extraordinary. The boys were not completely blind. In those eyes, long believed to be closed to the world, there was still a glimmer of hope, a first spark of light. That afternoon, when Caleb returned from a long meeting, he froze at the marble steps. From upstairs drifted a sound he had almost forgotten, the sound of laughter. How many years had it been since he'd heard his son's laugh? Too many. His heart pounded wildly as he stood, unable to take another step. Following the laughter, he found an unbelievable scene. Theo and Julian chasing beams of light from a flashlight in Lucia's hand. Their giggles filled the room as their once empty eyes tracked every glowing movement. Caleb's legs weakened. He leaned against the doorway, hands trembling. When Lucia clicked off the flashlight, both boys cried out in unison, "More, Miss Lucia, more." He had never seen them so eager. Emotion surged inside him, but alongside it came a storm of anger. "What are you doing?" His voice was low, caught between anger and disbelief. Lucia startled, then turned, her eyes steady, unashamed. "I was just playing with them for a little while. I made it clear from the beginning. Your job is to clean. No one has the right to interfere with my boys." His tone was heavy, but he couldn't deny what he had witnessed. They weren't just laughing, they were responding unmistakably to light. Lucia inhaled deeply, then spoke softly but firmly. "I know I crossed a line, but please give me just 1 minute. I need to say this." Caleb stood silent, torn, then gave a small nod. Lucia stepped closer, her voice calm yet resolute. "Mr. Morgan, I once had a younger brother. He was born with poor vision, but through simple games with light and sound, he developed many skills. Tragically, he died in an accident at 15. But I never forgot what I learned from him, and when I heard your sons crying, I knew they are not entirely lost in darkness." Caleb frowned, forcing back emotion. He had heard countless stories of hope from nannies before, all of them ending in heartbreak. But Lucia was different. Her words were not empty promises. They carried lived experience, spoken from the heart of someone who had shared the pain. He muttered, "The world's best doctors said it was impossible. I spent tens of millions only to hear the same verdict. No hope." Lucia replied firmly, "Maybe they overlooked something. Do you remember in the very first report there was a note? Possible light perception requires further testing?" At first, Caleb clenched his fists, his eyes burning with anger and doubt. He had never noticed, or perhaps had forced himself to forget. He looked at his sons, laughing innocently in the corner, could not accept that a maid dared to challenge the dozens of medical verdicts that had condemned him to despair for 7 long years. And a single thought pierced him. Had he wasted 7 years by giving up too soon? Lucia held his gaze. "I won't promise a cure, but I believe there is still light in their eyes. If nurtured properly, they may develop far more than you imagine." The room grew heavy with silence. Caleb bowed his head, fists clenched. Anger warred with longing, fear of another crushing disappointment, battling with the desperate desire to believe in a miracle. At last he lifted his eyes, voice breaking. If you are right, then I owe you my life. But if you're wrong, I don't know if I can survive another fall." Lucia nodded, her eyes shining with conviction. "Then let me try. Just let me try." For the first time in years, Caleb allowed a fragile spark of hope to slip back into his heart. From the moment Caleb agreed to let Lucia try, a new door had opened. But at the same time, elsewhere, another door creaked open, a door leading to fierce resistance from those who had sworn the twins would never see the light. News of Theo and Julian's strange progress spread quickly, even though Caleb tried to keep it quiet. Former staff whispered, and soon the story reached the last person Caleb wanted to face, Dr. Martin Hale. Martin was not only a renowned ophthalmologist, but also the very doctor who had signed off on countless reports declaring the twins completely blind from birth. He had built his reputation on certainty. For someone, especially a housemaid, to challenge his verdict was an insult he could not tolerate. One morning, as Caleb worked in his office, The doorbell rang. The housekeeper announced an important visitor. Standing at the entrance was Martin Hale, clad in a sharp gray suit, fury flickering in his eyes. "Mr. Morgan, we need to talk." His voice was ice. Caleb led him to the living room. Lucia stood quietly nearby. Martin sat, placing a thick folder on the table. "I hear someone is conducting dangerous experiments with the boys. You know, false hope can scar children's minds worse than blindness itself." Caleb forced himself to stay calm. What I witnessed with my own eyes was no false hope. For the first time ever, my sons followed the light. "Can you explain that?" Martin sneered. "Children are imaginative. They can react to sounds or simply guess. It doesn't change the truth. They are totally blind." Lucia's fists tightened, but her voice remained steady. "With respect, I've observed them closely. They're not just responding to sound. They turn their heads precisely toward the light, recognizing brightness and darkness. That cannot be coincidence." Martin's eyes turned cold as he faced her. "And who are you to make such claims? An unemployed teacher? A maid? You have no medical degree, no authority." His words cut deep, but Lucia held her ground. "I'm not a doctor, but I lived with a blind sibling. I know the difference between real perception and imagination." And I saw it in Theo and Julian's eyes. The air grew taut like a drawn bow. Finally, Martin rose, voice dripping with threat. "If you don't stop this immediately, I'll report you to the medical board. You're allowing an unqualified outsider to interfere with your children. The legal consequences will be severe." He stormed out, leaving the room suffocating with tension. Caleb sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. He has influence. If this goes to court, things could get very ugly. Lucia placed her hand firmly on the table, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Morgan, we can't stop now. I don't ask you to trust me completely, but trust what you saw with your own eyes. The boys need a chance." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. In Lucia's eyes there was no arrogance, only pure conviction. And he knew the truth could not be buried forever. Weeks later, just as Martin had warned, 2 inspectors from the state medical board arrived at the Morgan estate. With badges and stern expressions, they demanded to evaluate Theo and Julian's condition. Caleb's chest tightened, but Lucia gently squeezed his hand and whispered, "Don't be afraid. The truth will defend itself." The 2 inspectors from the medical board entered the room where Theo and Julian sat beside Lucia. At first, the boys tensed at the sight of strangers in suits, their small hands gripping each other tightly. One inspector, Mr. Davis, crouched down and spoke gently. "Boys, I'd like to try a little game." He switched on a flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. To his astonishment, both Theo and Julian turned their heads to follow the light, their eyes tracking it with precision. When he passed his hand in front of the beam, both boys immediately reacted. "It's darker now," Julian exclaimed. The other inspector, Mrs. Carter, exchanged a wide-eyed glance with her colleague. They quickly scribbled notes, then turned to Caleb. "Mr. Morgan, we see no signs of deception or danger here. On the contrary, the boys are clearly showing visual responses." She paused, then added, "We recommend that you take them to a reputable center for a second professional opinion. It's possible the initial diagnosis overlooked something." Caleb stood frozen. For the first time in 7 years, someone from the medical world openly admitted. Hope remained. Lucia stepped closer, speaking softly. "Mr. Morgan, I know a doctor. Her name is Grace Langford, one of the leading pediatric vision specialists in Portland. I once took a short course taught by her. If anyone can uncover the truth, it's her." Caleb lifted his head, his eyes flickering with both light and fear. He exhaled heavily. "I've heard too many ifs in my life, Lucia, but this time, maybe I can't walk away." 3 days later, Caleb brought Theo and Julian to Grace's modern clinic. The room gleamed with state-of-the-art equipment. Unlike the doctors before, Grace knelt first, smiling warmly at the boys before touching any machine. "Hello, young men. I'm Grace. Today we're going to play a few little games." At the word games, the twins perked up, curiosity glinting in their faces. Grace began with a special light board. As colorful shapes lit up, both boys turned their heads, eyes following with intent focus. She jotted notes quickly, then switched to another test. Beams of red, blue, and yellow. Julian wrinkled his nose. "The red one feels warmer," Theo added. "And that one feels colder." Caleb held his breath. This was no vague response. This was clear differentiation. Finally, Grace used advanced scanners to examine the retinas and optic nerves. After nearly an hour, she removed her glasses and faced Caleb and Lucia, her expression grave. "Mr. Morgan, what I'm about to say may bring both relief and anger." Caleb straightened, his hands trembling. "The boys are not completely blind. Based on these results, they retain about 30% functional vision. With proper stimulation from an early age, they could have developed nearly normal sight." The room fell into stunned silence. Caleb looked at his sons, giggling at the light board, his throat tightening. He whispered, 7 years. 7 years they told me there was no hope. Grace set her hand gently on the table. "I'm afraid the initial diagnosis was not just overlooked, it may have been deliberately ignored. This is not a minor oversight, Mr. Morgan. This is a betrayal of medical trust." Lucia blinked back tears, her voice steady. "I knew it. I saw the spark in their eyes." Caleb buried his face in his hands, tears slipping through. For the first time in years, he wept not from despair, but because the truth had finally emerged. The light had never abandoned his children. It had been hidden under negligence and deceit. Grace met their eyes firmly. "What matters now is to begin visual stimulation therapy immediately. I'll design a program suited for them. But beyond that, Mr. Morgan, I advise you to re-examine all medical records. I don't believe this was a mere mistake." Caleb gripped Lucia's hand, his voice trembling but resolute. "They stole 7 years of my children's lives. Now I will take everything back." When Caleb gripped Lucia's hand and vowed he would take everything back, it wasn't just a promise. It was the beginning of a new journey, one where light slowly returned to the mansion that had been buried in darkness for 7 years. From that day forward, the Morgan household began to change, little by little. The heavy curtains that had been drawn shut for years were replaced with lighter fabric, allowing natural sunlight to spill into the rooms. In hallways once filled with silence, the sound of footsteps and the bright laughter of 2 boys now echoed as they explored a world through eyes long dismissed as useless. Lucia was the architect of this transformation. Each morning she prepared simple, light games, using flashlights, colored glass, glowing balls, even paper lanterns. With every game, Theo and Julian advanced a little further. At first, they merely turned their heads toward brightness. Then they began noticing changes in intensity. Soon after, they started to distinguish basic colors. One afternoon, as the golden light of sunset streamed through the window, Lucia held a sunflower in front of Theo. He squinted, then whispered slowly, "Yellow?" Caleb, standing behind him, heard every syllable. His entire body trembled. In that moment, he broke down in tears. For 7 years he had waited for the day his child would name a color. Julian progressed quickly as well. He began chasing a glowing ball that Lucia rolled across the floor. His steps were clumsy, but each one was a heartbeat to the family. It wasn't only their vision improving, their spirits blossomed too. Once children who only cried in darkness, they were now brimming with curiosity, asking questions, laughing out loud. Caleb had once believed the greatest asset of his life was his billion-dollar tech empire. Now he knew the true wealth was the laughter of his sons. One evening, after tucking the boys into bed, Caleb sat with Lucia in the living room. The firelight flickered across their faces. His voice was low, filled with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. You've given back to my family what I thought was lost forever." Lucia smiled softly, humility shining in her eyes. "I didn't bring the light. I just opened the door for it to return." In the months that followed, the Morgan mansion was no longer a cold, lifeless estate. It became a playground, a classroom, a true home. And in every corner, light, both literal and symbolic, returned, reviving hearts that had withered too long in the shadows. Light had returned to the mansion, but Caleb knew this new happiness would never be complete unless the truth of the past was brought into the open. And he was ready for a battle many would try to stop. Caleb began by reviewing every medical record of Theo and Julian. The thick reports once locked in his safe now stood as evidence of a long chain of negligence, or worse, deceit. More than once, his hands shook with rage, forcing him to pause. Lucia sat beside him, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Don't let anger cloud your focus. Think of the boys. They need you clear-headed to protect them." With support from Dr. Grace Langford, Caleb hired a top legal team and officially filed suit against Dr. Martin Hale and his clinic. The case quickly drew attention across Oregon. A billionaire tech mogul versus a celebrated physician. It was a story the media couldn't ignore. But the real shock came when other families stepped forward. They too had been told by Dr. Hale that their children were completely blind and had paid staggering sums for useless treatments. Outrage swelled, turning Caleb's lawsuit into a large-scale class action. At the first hearing, when Caleb's lawyers presented video evidence of Theo and Julian clearly responding to light, the courtroom fell silent. No one could deny the truth before their eyes. Dr. Hale tried to remain composed, but the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed him. His attorney argued weakly, "This may be an unexpected development, unrelated to the original diagnosis." Grace rose, her voice firm and clear. "No, the boys always had residual vision. With proper stimulation early on, they could have developed far beyond their current state. This is not a miracle. This is the consequence of negligence." Her words struck like a hammer. Headlines erupted. Society was shaken. Eventually, the Oregon Medical Board suspended Dr. Hale's license and launched a full investigation. Families received compensation. More importantly, a new law was passed. Any diagnosis of total congenital blindness must now be confirmed by at least 3 independent specialists before being declared final. On the day the verdict was announced, Caleb held the hands of his sons and Lucia, his eyes shining with pride. "They stole 7 years from us. But today, justice gave it back. Justice had been served, but for Caleb, the true victory wasn't in the courtroom. What mattered most was seeing the light shining in his son's eyes and in the heart of the woman who had changed everything. One spring evening, in a garden blooming with cherry blossoms, Caleb knelt before Lucia. He was no longer the cold billionaire he had once been, but a father, a man profoundly grateful from the depths of his soul. "Lucia, you've brought light back to my family. Will you walk the rest of this road with me, become the mother of Theo and Julian, and my wife?" Tears spilled down Lucia's cheeks. She nodded softly, her voice trembling. "Yes, I will." Cheers erupted behind them. Theo and Julian wrapped their arms around her, shouting with joy, "Mama Lucia! Mama Lucia!" From that day, the Morgan family was truly whole. With Dr. Grace's guidance, Theo and Julian began attending a regular elementary school in Portland, with only a few special accommodations. The first weeks were challenging, but the boys quickly caught up, even becoming an inspiration to their classmates. One afternoon, during art class, Julian proudly held up his drawing to the teacher. This is Mama Lucia, this is Dad Caleb, and this is me and Theo under the sun." The class applauded. His smile became living proof of the power of love and belief. Meanwhile, Dr. Grace completed her detailed research on Theo and Julian's case. The study was published in 15 countries, becoming an international reference that helped reshape how medicine approached visually impaired children. Lucia's name appeared in many articles, not as a maid, but as a hero who dared to challenge the word impossible. One late summer day, the four of them sat together in the garden. In Theo's hands was a drawing, 4 figures holding hands under a clear blue sky surrounded by sunlight. Julian gazed at the picture, then looked up, his voice sincere. "Mama Lucia didn't just help us see the world. She helped us believe in ourselves." Lucia hugged the boys tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face. Caleb wrapped an arm around her shoulders, smiling. The sunset bathed the garden in golden light, as radiant as the love and legacy they had created. A family, a miracle, and proof that light will always find its way back when love and faith are strong enough. 1 year after Lucia became Caleb's wife and mother to Theo and Julian, the Morgan mansion was unrecognizable. No longer a house weighed down by silence and sorrow, it now rang with laughter, the sound of a child's piano, and the sweet aroma of pastries from the kitchen where Lucia loved to bake for her family. Theo and Julian had just completed their first year at elementary school, filling their teachers and classmates with pride. They had not only made remarkable progress with their vision, but also shown intelligence, creativity, and courage. On the last day of school, when the class performed a choir piece, the twins stood hand in hand under the stage lights, their shining eyes a testament to the extraordinary journey their family had endured. From the audience, Lucia clasped Caleb's hand tightly. He leaned closer and whispered, "I never thought I could be this happy again." Lucia smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "True happiness comes when we learn to give, Caleb, and family is the greatest gift of all." A few months later, the Morgan family had yet another reason to celebrate. Lucia gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Clara, meaning pure light. On the day Clara came home, Theo and Julian eagerly took turns holding their sister, their faces glowing with excitement. Julian whispered, "She'll see the light from her very first day, and we'll show her every beautiful thing in the world." Behind them, Caleb wrapped his arms around Lucia. He said nothing, letting tears of joy stream freely down his cheeks. 1 year, just 1 year, had transformed everything. From the depths of despair, the Morgans had built not only a complete home and a radiant future, but a legacy greater than any fortune, the proof that when love leads the way, even the impossible can be rewritten.